Hello, I'm Toycat, and Sweden has some wild plans because they're going to pay foreign-born passport holders to leave the country. This is something they are doing in an effort to curb net migration, something which makes no sense on the surface because isn't Sweden in control of how many people come into the country? Surely it doesn't have to kick people out, it can just not have as many people in there. But yeah, this is something which already does exist. They pay people 10,000 Swedish crowns along with travel costs, that's just under $1,000, for refugees to leave the country, and they're looking into maybe expanding it to include naturalized Swedish citizens along with their families. This is something which seems very crazy, like why would you pay these people money? But it's actually quite interesting that this is something which the Swedish government sees as a net gain, and many other countries do, because some countries have even bigger benefits targeted at people leaving the country. Why would they do that? Let's talk a little bit about immigration and the weird world of countries paying to get rid of you. So, fun fact, in Europe, this is roughly the immigrant population by country. You can see there is a stark divide between West and East, but then an even starker divide between North and South. Like, you know, even the wealthy Western countries of like Italy and Portugal don't have that high of a net migration rate. Apparently Andorra has a 60% immigrant population, but you can see that as you get further north, lots of people like to go there. There are lots of reasons as to why, but high standards of living is often cited as one, and the very generous welfare systems is often cited as another. The Scandinavian model of benefits is something which is really great for the cohesion in those countries, but it has had some interesting knock-on effects that we'll come back to later. But now, just as a fun thing, I found this recently. It's from 2011, so it's admittedly it's got some outdated things here, but these are the largest foreign-born communities in the EU, about 300 million people in the EU, so just under 1% of them are Moroccan. That's interesting, but interestingly, something like 0.1% are United Statesian, and I think that's so hilarious. As someone who had you might have known, I had an American girlfriend who was living with me in Europe. There's something just so bizarre about that. Like, you know, your ancestors would have gone through like a month-long voyage and one of the most crazy journeys in the world to move to the US, and then like 3 generations later, you're like, okay, let's just hop on a budget airline flight and let's go live in Europe. I think that's crazy personally, and maybe you find this interesting too. But anyway, back to the article. One of the interesting things about this is the reason that they say they're going to do this is because sustainable immigration is necessary to strengthen integration and reduce social exclusion. Again, I feel like everyone agrees that there is some percentage of an immigrant population that is too high. Even if you're the most radical person out there, you'd still say, yeah, you can't have 95% of your population be from abroad, because otherwise there would be no necessarily shared values, at least not immediately. You have to have some amount of trickling in to strengthen integration and make sure that there aren't people who are socially isolated. And so, as a way to continue to lower their lower the number of people who are net migrating to Sweden, they want to make sure that they're going to pay people, and they want to make sure that they're not sending the wrong message, because there's an interesting comparison to Denmark, which pays people about 15 times more. But Sweden specifically says that if they made the grant too much larger, if they spent too much more money, then it would send people the message they're not welcome in Sweden. The largest reason they're not doing it is not the cost of it, which is interesting, but is instead the fact that they don't want to signal to everyone who is a foreign-born Swede, we could pay you a lot of money, a gargantuan sum, $15,000 just to get out of here. So why is it that they would? Why would it be worth it to spend $15,000? And why would any country do that? Well, I actually just decided to. I was kind of curious. Like, I started reading about immigration to Denmark, admittedly on Wikipedia if you're the sort of person who has reservations about that. But I don't think you should, because one of the interesting things about Denmark is that they made a new asylum system in 2023. This was under the left-wing Social Democrat government. They are a left-leaning party. It's a Social Democrat party, in fact, a center-left party in a fairly center-left country, right? So this is under a center-left government right here. What they actually did is they said, if you are an asylum seeker or an immigrant or someone who just has dual national from outside of Europe, you can voluntarily return to your country of origin, and we'll give you 150,000 Danish crowns, 20,000 euros, plus we'll give you medicine for a year if you need that, and 4 years of education for your children, which is nuts, right? Why would a country do that? On the surface, you might be thinking like, wow, yeah, this is some generous welfare giveaway, but actually the goal is, when you look at the way people immigrate, this is something interesting that you can find. This is data from 2014 to do with the net tax payments of natives and migrants to Denmark. You can see that they, interestingly, a lot of Scandinavian countries in particular have a problem where native populations, this is the general cycle of being in a Western country. You are a net loss to the state for your first 20 years. You use education, you use health, you use all these things, and you don't even pay taxes, you filthy 8-year-olds. And then when you get to 70, you devalue to the age of an 8-year-old. You stop working. You start needing very expensive surgeries again. And so as a result, you're worthless to the state after about age 60, 65 when you retire, because they have to spend so much money on you, and you're worthless before the age of 20. So between the years of 20 and 65, you basically pay for those people. Or you could say, maybe more optimistically, for yourself. You pay for your education back, and then you pay for your later pension. But in either case, most people do that. But if you look at this graph right here, you can see that non-Western migrants, in Denmark at least, don't ever really end up being that big of a net contributor. There is an age around 45 to 50 when people are at the peak of their career, where they're sort of above the line, but at least in Denmark and some other countries too, it never really works out being that big of a net positive. There is, I feel like a lot of people when they talk about immigration, they either go to one of two camps. Either it's this huge, like gift that we're doing, we're letting people into the country specifically because we're so kind, or it's the other way around. We're like, this is our secret scheme, we're going to take money from these people, they'll come here and pay taxes, then they'll leave when they get too old, and we'll be able to have the best of both worlds. But if you actually look at the net contribution, so here is the UK's net contribution. As you can see, it is actually quite high. It's 20 billion more taken in tax payments and national insurance, minus the amount given for tax credits and child benefits, which actually is not that big of a, it's not that broad of a scope. There are many, many more benefits than just tax credits and child benefits. But interestingly, you can see there's like 20 billion a year are earned from the migrant population of the UK, but when you look at the number of immigrants that come to the UK, it's something like 1% of the population a year right now. We left the EU and then we started replacing our EU immigration with non-EU immigration. There's a funny thing about that in there somewhere, but if you actually look into it, you can see it's like, yeah, there's like 2% of the government budget, something like that, 0.2%, actually comes from this net boost. It is something where the world as a whole isn't quite sure how we feel about, like, is letting people in from another country an act of, is it like a really solid act for both parties? Is it an act of generosity from the country to the person? Or is you moving to a country an act of generosity from you to that country? If you move after the age of 20, that country doesn't have to pay for your education, but they get all the benefit of your tax money. It's something I feel like we don't really know fully how to discuss, but basically, yeah, if you can, if you leave a country before you get to the age where you do that, you're a net loss to that country. If you leave the country when you're a net loss to that country, weirdly enough, if you look at this, like, so the average non-Western migrant, I didn't look at the methodology to see which countries they grouped in as Western or not, but you're costing the government something like 3,000 euros a year if you're between the ages of 20 to 35, let's say. And so that means that if the government can get you out of there for 15 years, that is a saving of 45,000 euros. And that is the logic used by these countries of like, yeah, if we pay you 20,000 euros and you don't come back for 15 years, that's saving us 25,000 euros, which then makes a bigger question about the social contract at some point, doesn't it? I think the better system that you really need to have if you're going to try and, if you want to have like a fair system, because a lot of people look at that and say, well, surely then if you're going to pay foreigners to leave, you should also pay people who live there to leave. I think it's only fair. I feel like, if Sweden's going to pay you $1,000 to get out of the country, if you're a foreign-born passport holder, it should pay a Swedish passport holder if you feel like leaving, as long as you earn below a certain threshold or whatever. If you feel like leaving and you're a net loss to the country anyway, why not do that? There are, if we are going to put a dollar value on, the government providing for you, then we need to admit that either there is a huge dollar value in you being able to move somewhere, and that's something which Denmark actually matches by saying you have to pay collateral if you want to move into Denmark. You pay 57,000 Danish crowns, and then so it's just over 5,000 pounds, I guess you could say, and then you get that money back as you start doing, as you get a residence permit or you learn languages, and but basically, long story short, if you break up, you don't get the money back. If you end up not being allowed to live in Denmark anymore, and you end up being a drain to the, I feel like having collateral is a good solution to that, but then that also makes migration into a country less feeling like you're doing a good thing and more feeling like you're having guest workers. How do you actually resolve the problem of You know, the fact that living in a country has a huge value to people. You know, being Swedish has a huge benefit. Having a Swedish passport is a huge boon to you for your travels to the rest of the world. The same is true for Denmark. The same is true for the UK or Germany, or for that matter, Italy or Spain. Or, you know, being a member of a nation state is a very, very, very huge thing in terms of how much we value it at. And so why do we say that the way you get it is by some vague conditions, rather than saying, actually, yeah, this is some huge gift you're going to get? In the UK, we have an interesting policy that people don't like, where you have to, your partner has to earn a certain amount of money if you want to live with them. For example, it's raising to £38,700. And the reason they say that is because, yeah, foreign partners should not be a burden on the state. Every person you let into the country has a potential of being a huge net contributor, of being a huge boon for the government, but also has the potential of being a huge cost. And how do you weed out the cost without weeding out the how do you weed out for the costs without losing the benefits? How do you get just the benefits and none of the costs? It's something which I think we're kind of struggling with, especially in Europe right now. And I feel like this is the sort of thing that I want to at least preface today's video by saying you have a one of the things that I want to my big message, my soapbox I want to share is that you have a value to your government. That value is statistically going to be a slight net positive. Actually, I mean, if you actually look into it, the fact that if you look at government, if you look at revenue versus spending, the government spends more on everyone than they earn from everyone. But if we ignore the way that problem eventually leads, then in general, if we leave that to the side, everyone in a country is roughly, you know, if you equalize across the entire thing, worth zero. The government takes money from you and the government gives money to you. But what actually happens is there's a redistribution effect. So if you earn below a certain amount or you live in a lower income area, you might get more money from the government than you give to it. And this means that, broadly speaking, when you know, the way the government's actually worked for most of history is that they're, you know, being a part of that country was just by your circumstance of where you were born. If you happen to be born right here, good news, the UK government's got you sorted. When we introduced, you know, some form of benefit or housing bonus for being on low incomes, you benefit from that too. But with the rapid movement of people that has resulted from people being able to fly around the world, and with the huge increases that countries are seeing in immigration, you basically get to pick a system, and at that point you have to be very careful to make sure that you have the system that people want to move to contribute to you, or you can't have that system anymore. You can only have, or maybe to put it this way, right? You can only have so much generosity, and unless you're willing to say that everyone, regardless of where they live in the world, gets some benefit, you have to say that if there's, well, if there's 5 million Danish people, right, and the Danish government has, you know, like say 50 billion that they give to all their social causes, then every additional person is lowering the amount you can give, unless that person can increase the amount in the total, which is the struggle that every country's going through. And I don't know the answer. I just feel like the question's one that we kind of avoid because it makes you feel like you're doing something bad. But when the questions make you feel a little uncomfortable, maybe that's when you should at least consider you know, working out what the real answer is. Because I think that there is a bit of a, you know, I feel like unless you can have the broad population be on board with, you know, like high amounts of immigration, then it's going to eventually cause you other problems, as Sweden is apparently finding out. So, yeah, with that said, I hope you'll enjoy this video. Hope you found it interesting, but I'm just kidding. Second channel, don't care. Don't worry, the OSRS guesser video, it's coming soon. I'm gonna guess where I am in RuneScape. It's gonna be great. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about this because it was fascinating. So, see you next time. Bye.